Shalom again. This is Avi Lipkin with today's second update for December the 5th, 2013. Today is, of course, a very important day because of the visit of John Kerry, Secretary of State of the United States. This was my first update I did just before. This update will be completely different on a completely different subject. This morning, as I was enjoying my coffee, and here in Israel, when you say you have cable TV or a satellite dish, you pick up stations like China and Russia and India and Japan, all the Arab stations, European stations. So I'm flicking the channels and I get to something very interesting. It was China TV, People's Republic of China. And it turns out they're having a conference today, December the 5th, about desertification, the turning of the planet Earth into a desert. And they were talking primarily about Africa. And to help display this, I have here a map of the world, and here you have the continent of Africa. And here to the north, North Africa, what you have is you have Morocco, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria. These countries are known as North Africa. And North Africa is primarily the Sahara Desert. It's always been there. And this desert has been expanding. If we go back all the way to the times of Pharaoh, you know, Egypt, which is here, during the time of Pharaoh, was a jungle. And Israel, Syria, all this area, except this area was known as the Fertile Crescent, but this was desert. And of course, the desert was more to the west. And if you remember the 10 plagues, little by little, the desert moved across North Africa into Egypt. And today, when archaeologists want to know what's happening in Egypt, they have to dig down about 10 feet or 15 feet until they hit the original soil of Egypt, which was jungle. So now Egypt is part of the Sahara, part of the desert of the north. And what the Chinese were talking about in their TV show was the movement of the desert southward. The movement of the desert southward, the movement of the desert southward. And what we see every year that the line of the desert becomes lower and lower and lower. And what happens is that the Chinese never mentioned the word Islam even once, or Arabs or Muslims even once. But what's happening is wherever the Muslims live is desert. And so when they run out of green land for their flocks and their crops, what they do is they move down to the greener areas, and then they turn the greener areas also into desert. After they've destroyed that, they move further south to get to the other greener areas. So now, this was in the news today from the People's Republic of China, an international convention about the desertification of the world. Then I flick the channels, I get to France 24 TV, and in today's news, this is breaking news, there's a country here in the heart of Africa. It's called Central African Republic. And this Central African Republic, you can see, is wedged in between Equatorial Africa, which is here, and the Sahara to the north, Sahel to the south. Sahel is between the desert and the jungle. It's green, but it's semi-arid. And what's happening is that terrorists from Libya, from Chad, from Egypt, from Sudan, terrorists from North Africa are all coming down to this little country, which is green, it's jungle. And the population of Central African Republic is 4 million people, the majority of which are Christians. So what happens when the Muslims come down to a Christian country? They kill the Christians. And in the last 48 hours, 450,000 Christians have fled from their homes because of terrorists chopping their heads off and arms and legs off. We're talking about a Holocaust. And of course, it's not mentioned in the media at all. Of course, the French TV spoke about it. France, one of the reasons France TV is talking about it is because France is sending troops to Central African Republic. They were sending troops to Mali. And you have to remember, these countries were originally French colonies. The French feel a connection with these areas. The United States is not going to do anything about it. Russia, China are not going to do anything about it. And Christian lives are expendable, just as Jewish lives are expendable when it is the Muslims who are coming in and doing the killing. We're talking about 2 million black people in the south of Sudan who've been slaughtered over the last 30 years. We're talking about West Sudan, Darfur, where Muslims are being slaughtered by whiter-skinned Muslims. The black African Muslims are slaughtered, the ones who live here, by the whiter Muslims from the northeast of Sudan. Something very interesting that we need to talk about also. There are countries like Liberia, we're talking about Ivory Coast, we're talking about Nigeria, there are in Cameroon. These countries are all bordering the desert to the north and the jungle to the south. Muslim terrorists have been coming down over the last decades to slaughter Christians, to clear the Christians out so that the Muslims can then take it over. Now, I've written 6 books. In my second book, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival, I talk about Gaddafi's plan for, I'll correct myself, my first book is Fanatic Islam, a Global Threat. I talk about Gaddafi when he was alive saying that Africa would be the first continent to be completely taken over by Islam. And we have an example of Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor was the president of Liberia, which is right here. Charles Taylor lived in Libya. He was trained by Libya. He was armed and financed by Libya. And he came down with Muslim mercenaries from Libya to slaughter the Christians of Liberia. And we saw the Christians of Ivory Coast being slaughtered. We saw the Christians of Nigeria. Even to this day, Christians are being slaughtered by the Muslims as the Muslims try to take over all these areas and work their way south and make Africa a Muslim continent. And like I said before, except for France, there are not really any countries interested in what's going on in Africa. Another interesting point, here to the southern part of South Africa, we see a country which received its independence through great travail, and yet today the African National Congress is working very closely with Islamic groups. Islam is growing very radically in South Africa. A lot of money is pouring into South Africa. We see, for example, a country like Malawi. Malawi is a country that, where's Malawi here? It's here somewhere. Malawi is a country that is also being taken over by money. It is not a Muslim country, but the Muslims have come in with money in order to take it over. An interesting point, and I don't know if this is really true or not, because some people said it was just a hoax, but there's a country called Angola. And Angola is here in the south of Africa, and Angola has passed a law banning Islam, which is a very incredible thing. They do not want any more trouble from Islam. They've had their civil war, and they see what's going on in the countries around them. So we can see here a very interesting story developing in Africa, in many, many countries of Africa, in which Islam is little by little taking over. You have a country here called Ethiopia. Ethiopia is about 50-50, 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. The Muslims are winning. You have this little country more to the north, Eritrea, that's 50-50, and the Muslims are taking over there too. The South Sudanese, who are primarily Christian, broke away from the north. They have their little country there. So you have here a whole bunch of states which are 50-50 or confrontation states with Islam, all of this area here, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have been slaughtered in Africa by the Muslims coming down from the north. This is something strategically very important for Israel because Israel is right here and Africa is right next door. This is something that we're going to have to watch very closely in the future. And again, today, like I said before, I don't want to say by chance because nothing is coincidence, nothing is chance, but I was just playing the stations, and here we see on the one hand, God bringing the desert south, because if he brings the Muslim south, he brings the desert south from the Chinese TV. And then here, right on that borderline, is a new war zone called Central African Republic, and the French are going to be sending in troops in addition to the 6,000 African Union troops. So It's a story we're going to have to be paying close attention to in the future. Shabbat Shalom to everyone.